Hello everyone and welcome back to Naked Insider. This is a really exciting moment to have you back again.
Yay!
And Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too.
Thanks, Peter. So today we have something quite interesting, and the question that I want to pose to you, my friend, is what is the real cost of bullying?
The real cost of bullying. So the question I would like to answer that with, answering a question with a question, is how would you like to have your critical people frozen? Totally frozen.
Totally frozen.
Immobile.
Immobile. So to find out, you have to stay in tune. So let's define what is bullying.
So bullying is an attack on a person. It is literally an assault. Most of the time it's a psychological assault, but it is one of those nevertheless. And there are some very interesting biological processes that go on inside a person who's on the receiving end of that. So they have some very tangible and very real effects on the human body.
It can be manifested in various different abuse. I mean, it could be verbal, it could be physical,
yes,
it could be social. I mean, we know, for example, schools is rife with bullying and so forth. What's the impact?
So literally any kind of bullying triggers the fight or flight instinct, something that is perceived as an attack. And the thing is that it is the perception of the person that's receiving the bullying that makes the most difference. Literally what is happening is, in technical terms, is it's called an amygdala hijack. So the amygdala is the part of the core brain that everything goes through before it goes to the rational part of the brain, which means that in the olden days when we had saber-toothed tigers, our eyes would see a saber-toothed tiger, and before we even processed that, our amygdala would turn around and say, "We've got to run!" So yes, it's the classic fight or flight process, but it's modified by the fact now that we are supposed to have this brain that civilises us, the frontal lobes, that makes better decisions, but it's being hijacked all the time if you are triggering the amygdala, which is essentially a surprise attack.
Correct, and we also know that different people react differently to certain situations, because not only can they flight or fright, but they can also faint. Correct. Fear,
yes,
and they can fight or freeze, which is what you mentioned
exactly
a lot. So, from a perspective of what is we talked about the impact of the person, but what is the impact therefore on the organisation?
Okay, so the impact on the organisation is that you have somebody who is essentially been compromised in terms of their internal communications processes. So fight or flight kicks off adrenaline, but adrenaline doesn't wind down as quickly as a synaptic response, as a nervous response. So you actually have a residual period of time where that person is still frozen, or that person is still rattled, I think is the non-technical term for it. So the question then becomes is, how does that person function while they are still under the influence of their own internal hormonal system? And how long that goes for depends entirely on the person's individual biology as well. So
how does the organisation sort of, you have bullying taking place in an organisation. So what's the impact to the organisation then?
The impact is, first of all, the organisation needs to recognise that this is a problem. I think it's so easy nowadays to say, well, it's just, par for the course, everybody went through that. The reality is that it has the most profound effect on people who are still shaken. Perhaps they will send the wrong email to the competitor, perhaps they will leave out some sensitive pieces of information, perhaps they'll add up a column of numbers incorrectly. These are very real and tangible impacts that can happen.
Because what's happening is you're now generating within that person a level of stress, anxiety, so the ease of making mistakes is just becomes so much easier because they're not thinking. And as we talk, there could be, freezing or as you say, potentially brain dead.
Yes.
Excuse the term, but
well, it's a level of incompetence that increases because of having to deal with that internal processes going on.
But within the organisation and maybe the colleagues around will probably also find it quite tough to see that happen if they do nothing at all.
Correct.
We've got a situation where probably it's difficult to do business, potentially conflict with other employees, we've got increase in stress.
Yep.
And then I think it could get much worse. We could get to a situation where there's business disruption, so the person is really not even working,
yes.
So he's not productive, he's not performing, and so projects are way behind.
Yep.
There's potential that if the person maybe is reacting to the situation, that the person might decide to leave the organisation, so take all that knowledge that they've gained while working with the organisation.
Or a passive-aggressive response.
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
Because the number of times, if a person feels disempowered on an overt level, it is quite possible for that person to then say, well, if I can't operate and retaliate on an overt level, I can actually retaliate on a covert level.
For sure.
And the question then becomes, is it just specifically to the person that did the bullying, or is it to the organisation that let that happen in the first place?
Correct. And by the way, I mean, we're talking about behaviours that could actually lead to people who are trustworthy to actually commit some form of action that is either unintentional or intentional harm against the organisation.
Yes, absolutely. And these people probably had no intention to do that. But there is an edge point over which, if you tip a person, it becomes unpredictable. That's probably the best way of describing it.
Yeah, very much so. It is so much unpredictable. So the question is then, what are the strategies for an organisation to start alleviating this issue? What can they do?
As I said, first of all, recognise that there is that this is something that won't be tolerated in the organisation. Set out very clear rules and guidelines of codes of conduct, and set up processes in place that, should it actually come to their attention, and obviously get the ability to report that in a safe way, that it will be dealt with in a very appropriate manner.
Well, we hope so. But I was going to suggest a few other things. I think across the organisation, I think management or an executive have got to take a decision that the policies and values as an organisation are all being followed, because you can't have a multi-tiered of all my employees will do this policy, but I won't follow it.
Correct.
So that sets a tone of lack of trust or distrust, and then I think, as you mentioned, you should never excuse it. You should, management should own up and say, okay, look, this is a behaviour that's not part of our, who we are.
Yes. Or values. We go back to values.
Values, exactly. Yes. So if you haven't seen it, go back to, I think it was the previous video. It's all about values. And another thing is really identifying the source of the problem. So taking the person who's perpetrating the bullying and really identifying, well, we see your symptoms, which is the bullying part, but what's the root cause?
What's the root cause behind that? Yes, absolutely. And look, many times, I'm not saying this is happening all the time, but the sense of power that comes from being able to bully someone is actually an indication in many instances of a lack of power or a lack of perceived power inside that person. So the constant having to reaffirm, yes, I am powerful, gives them a hit, if you like, for a little period of time, and then when they feel disempowered again, they conduct the behaviour once again.
Correct. And there's probably another story behind that as well.
There is.
Another strategy I think most organisations should focus on is basically documenting it. So
Absolutely.
identifying the bullying, identifying what's been said, how it's been said. So it's all from a legal context, written and so forth. Look, Polly, you might want to also consider isolating the person. So if that person is continuously bullying a specific person for some specific reason, you might want to split them and move them away.
Yep.
And see if that changes the scene. Question.
Yes.
What if you saw an organisation that has this challenge in bullying, what is the number one thing you would advise them to do?
Recognise it for what it is. If there is an organisation that has the fingerprints, if you like, of bullying going on, then the people who run that organisation need to recognise that there is something happening, and they need to be able to say, "Hey, this is not part of our values. This is not part of our company operation manual, if you like." And be prepared to follow through. It's the old parenting adage, don't do that or I'll do something nasty to you. Well, if you do something nasty,
correct,
then the child will soon learn that, that's just mum and dad saying that.
Correct.
Not saying that, the business owners are...
But they can get away with it.
But they can get away with it.
Yes.
People will get away with what they can get away with.
Correct. So there you have it. So the real cost of bullying could lead to the real risk of insider actions that could cause severe harm to your organization. So that concludes this video. The next video we're going to do something also very similar, which is what is the cost of having a toxic employee?
Yep.
Now, by the way, I was going to say, one question I forgot to ask you there, Peter, which is basically, how can you help them?
The organisation. Okay.
Correct.
So the organisation, we as a unit can sit down and work with them on individual policies on how to address the situation, what's the most appropriate way of doing things. The documentation is paramount because it's so easy to just leave things unspoken and not recognise that it's happened 10 times and you think it might only have happened 3 times. So documentation is really important, and we can certainly help with that. And also provide resources for the people that are on the receiving end of that. There are some pretty simple things you can do on that basis as well too, which is...
Correct.
So we can certainly help provide some ideas there as well.
Excellent. So to find those details out, just check down below the video. We've got the links that you can actually reach us. So with that, Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated, and look forward to doing the next video.
Yes.
Thank you.